If We Were Giants, Chapter 6. Kira's heart was thumping as she made her way through the doorway, slowly and gently, so the bamboo curtain wouldn't clack. She realized she was more afraid of getting caught by her mother and father than she was of being outside, all alone. But she had heard their sleep breathing, even heavier than normal, when passing by their private quarters. Those two were definitely out for the night. She tiptoed down the wooden porch steps, skipping the creaky one. Scanning the courtyard, she was relieved to see that no one was out. Tico had been right. All the grown-ups were just as exhausted as Tara and Dejana after a full day of festival preparations. It was quiet and still, which made it that much harder not to scream when the lid of the wicker basket came flying off and Tico popped his head out. "I knew it," he whispered fiercely. "Shh." Kira made a keep it down gesture and pointed at the hut. "You've been acting weird all evening," Tico said a little more quietly. "I knew you were up to something." "It's nothing." Kira shook her head. I left something. In your secret spot. I had to sneak back there and pick it up." Tico pointed to the knapsack Kira was wearing. "And why did I see you packing leftovers, a map, and your cutting stone?" Kira sighed. What kind of storyteller was she going to be if she couldn't even lie convincingly to her brother? Tico leaned forward, eyes wide. "You're going outside, aren't you?" Kira realized there was no way out but straight through. "Okay, yes, I am, but it's only for a few hours. I'll be home before anyone wakes up." She glanced back at the dark windows of the hut. "But you can't tell Ma and Pa. You promise?" "Of course I promise." "Thank you so much, Tico. If they found, because I'm going with you." He clambered out of the basket, then reached back inside and pulled out a knapsack of his own. "I'm already packed." "No way," Kira said. "Not going to happen." "Then you're not going either." He turned toward the hut, cupped his hand over his mouth, and took an exaggerated breath, as if prepared to yell. Kira clamped her hand over his face. "You wouldn't." Tico nodded slowly. He totally would. He sighed again and removed her hand. "Come on, Kira," Tico pleaded. "I'll be good, I promise. I could even help you." Kira chewed her lip and looked around the dark courtyard. She wasn't going to get as good a chance as this again, and with Tico apparently watching her every move, she might never even get another chance. She reluctantly concluded that he was right. She was going with him or not at all. She fixed him with a stare. "Rule number 1 is that you do everything I say." Tico grinned and nodded so hard it looked like he was trying to shake something out of his hair. "And rule number 2 is that you do everything you say." "I got it. Really and truly, Kira. You can trust me." A few moments later, they were creeping from terrace to terrace, hugging the interior rock wall to stay in the shadows. Their stealth was unnecessary, though. All was quiet throughout Zedo. It was a boring night for the watchers on duty. When they neared the eastern exit, Kira put a finger to her lips and motioned for Tico to crouch behind a stack of firewood. "When I give the signal, you race straight for the tunnel. No stopping or looking back. Understood?" Tico nodded solemnly. Kira reached into her knapsack and withdrew a stone, then threw it underhanded so it rolled after it hit the ground, clattering noisily. Next, she ducked down behind the firewood with Tico and peeked over the top of the stack. A moment later, a watcher emerged from the crack in the wall to investigate the noise. As soon as he was far enough away with his back turned to them, Kira grabbed Tico's hand and they raced into the tunnel together, twisting this way and that through its curves. Then they popped out under the vast night sky. Just like that. As on her previous trips with Pa, it felt exhilarating, but she knew they couldn't stop to take in the moonlit landscape. The Watcher would be back in just a moment, and things were much brighter out here. She tightened her grip on Tico's hand and had to pull him hard to get him moving. as his mouth was agape and his head was on a swivel as he got his first unobstructed view of all the stars in the night sky. She led him up a path on the outside of the volcano that curved above the secret entrance and away from the gaze of the watcher. They would head diagonally toward the rim of the crater for a while, then loop their way back down to the base, and finally across the plains toward Nakfulu. This was real. They were doing it. It was going a bit slow as Tico, his head permanently craned upward, stumbled over the rocks or stepped into holes as they waded through the tall grass of the plains. "Watch where you're going, Birdbrain," Kira whispered as she caught his elbow and set him upright once again. "I'm sorry, He spread out his arms to indicate the night sky. "I've never lived without walls, you know?" It was hard for Kira to stay annoyed, as she knew exactly what he was talking about. On her first trip outside, Taro had let her ride in the cart almost the entire time so that she could simply take everything in. As for this journey, Kira was using the stars to navigate as she had been taught. She also periodically stopped to study the map, one of Paha's, by the moonlight. If a group of takers was actually camped out near the village of Nafalu, then, she figured, there was only one place they could be, a lone copse of woods by the bend in the river, about 20-minute walk north of the waterfall, and if her calculations were correct, they should be getting close. In fact, that dark clump of vegetation rising up from the plains ahead of them was likely the spot. She stopped Tico and put her hands on his shoulders. "I need you to really listen to me," she whispered. "I know you are very clever, and starting now, I need you to act like you do when you're sneaking to your secret spot, okay? Very quiet and alert." Tico nodded solemnly. He mouthed, "I promise," to demonstrate how quiet he could be. "We're going to tiptoe over to that group of trees." She pointed to the woods in the distance. "And we're going to see if there are some people camped out there." "What people?" "Not sure. There might not even be any, but if there are, we need to count them and get a quick sense of what their camp is like, and that's all. As soon as we do that, we're going to hustle right back home and get into bed." Tico nodded some more. "And why are we doing this?" Kira slowly touched a fist to her forehead, hoped that the gravity of the situation would sink into Tico's brain. "We protect Zetu." "Are these..." His eyes went wide. "Are they bad people?" She wasn't sure how to answer. When the strange man in Lokowi had described the takers, Kira thought he was making everything up. But when Ma spoke in such worried tones, it had made Kira think twice. She frowned. What could Zedonans actually learn about outsiders when they stayed within the crater walls all the time? The Watchers were just guessing at the potential threats to the community. "You know what? It doesn't matter, because they're not going to see us, right?" The answer was as much to calm her own rising nerves as it was to satisfy Tico. "Right. Good. So I need you to forget about all those stars up there. Watch where you're walking and be super quiet until we make it back out here. Sometimes a true Zedonan warrior has to rely on stealth instead of might." Tico puffed out his chest at those words. "I promise," he said as he touched a fist to his forehead. Kira marveled at how much he looked like Tara in the moment. It was oddly comforting. Her plan was to enter the copse of trees to shield themselves from view. Being out on these wide open plains was starting to make her feel nervous, even if the tall grass did a good job of concealing them. Then they would slowly creep around the perimeter to see if they could discover anyone inside. As it turned out, spying wasn't necessary, because as soon as they got close to the mini forest, they could clearly hear the people within. Kira couldn't believe how noisy they were. shouting and laughing and carrying on, even at this time of night. These people had broken the first rule of camping by scaring off any potential game animals. With the racket they were making, she'd be surprised if there were any birds left in the trees. As they entered the forest and the light dimmed considerably, this little adventure started to seem like a very bad idea. She didn't want to take Tico any closer, but she certainly couldn't leave him here on his own. What if she couldn't find him again in the dark on her way back out? All Kira felt like doing, if she were being honest, was turning around and running all the way home. She glanced down at Tico as they listened to the boisterous sounds of the camp. The look on his face made it obvious he would be fully in favor of the sprinting home plan. She grabbed his hand and took a step back out of the forest so that a scream cut through the rest of the camp noise, a primal sound of pain and fear. Kara felt a moment of water-need weakness before her resolve stiffened. She intended to do her part to protect Zito no matter what. If these were indeed takers and they posed a real threat, then her people had to be warned. Kira would find answers because Zito deserved them. No, please stop! The anguished pleas tore through the night air. Kira took a deep breath. She would summon her courage and investigate, but she would not risk Tico's safety any more than she already had. Scanning the woods around them, she picked out an unusual tree that would be easy to find again. It had a broad trunk and long branches that drooped in a dome-like shape, nearly touching the ground. Tico would be safely concealed up there. Come here, she whispered. He complied without hesitation, clearly glad to have something to do other than stand there and listen to this horrible sounds coming from the camp. Kira cupped both hands at her waist to form a foothold. Step here, she whispered, and grab that thick branch to pull yourself up. When her little brother had clambered into the branches, Kira pulled hard on the strap of her back, clenching it tightly to her body so that she'd be able to maneuver better. Tico proved to be a natural at climbing trees, and soon they were some 30 feet above the ground. Kira decided this would be more than high enough to hide her brother from anyone who might walk underneath. She got close to his face. You are going to stay here until I return. Do not move from the spot and do not make noise. Understand? But I want to help. Kira raised a hand to cut him off. I stayed true to my word. You are outside. But now you will hold up your end of the bargain and do as I say. You will stay here until I get back. Another scream tore the night apart. To punctuate her command, Tico gulped and nodded slowly. Kara leaned forward and kissed him on the forehead. Then she turned and scrambled along a limb and leaped to a branch of a neighboring tree. She remained high above the forest floor as she made her way down toward the sounds of the camp, eyes accustomed to the dim light, hands and feet trained to find secure grips. Soon she was close enough to see the flickering light of campfires. Kara poked her head through a thick screen of leaves to find a limb on the next tree that could support her weight, and suddenly there was the camp spread out below her. The first thing she noticed was the size of the group. There were a lot of people, mostly men, but a few women, too, sitting around the campfire. No children that she could see, and nearby, tied to a tree, was a dog. Kira's breathing became shallow. She knew dogs had keen senses and hoped it wouldn't detect her. After Kira had wrapped her mind around the huge number of people in this camp, there was time to focus on the individual members, but she immediately regretted it. The word used by the uninvited storyteller back in Lukeway was disturbingly perfect, monstrous. These intruders were so abnormally tall, it looked like they had been stretched thin in some places. They were almost skeletal in their long arms and gaunt faces, but they had broad shoulders and big, powerful haunches. Their skin appeared leathery and tough, dimpled and a uniform ashy gray color, like a rhinoceros's. Kira wondered if they came from a desert environment where that tough exterior would protect them from heat and sandstorms. Also, they each had a shock of bone white hair, which she figured could have been bleached over time by prolonged exposure to the sun, and their clothes. There were no animal hides or cloth robes. Instead, these people wore thick coverings of what looked like leather and some sort of shiny, hard material. They looked ready for battle, a real one. Where would they possibly have come from? The unsettling feeling deep in Kira's chest that these people didn't belong here was about more than just their strange appearance. They seemed so clumsy as they lumbered around. They had somehow knocked down several small trees to clear a space for the camp, leaving logs and stumps for benches, and had recklessly trampled all the other vegetation nearby. From her bird's eye vantage point, it looked to Kira like an evil, lumbering giant from one of her father's scary stories had stamped an enormous foot in the middle of the forest and left this ragged clearing behind. Kira's stomach felt queasy. This went against everything she had been taught. Inside the volcano, each action one took could potentially affect another. So Zidonians behaved considerately. These takers careened around as if nothing mattered. Most unnerving of all was the source of these screams, a man much smaller than the others and dressed to the waist in robes of the Nafulu was tied to a tree. His feet were lashed to the trunk while his arms were stretched painfully high over his head and bound to branches above. People were occasionally punished for crimes in Zidu, but never like this. She wondered what horrible transgression the Nafulu man had committed. One of the takers, taller than the rest, somehow and thicker through the shoulders, with a bright red streak running through his white hair, stalked over to the tree and yelled into the criminal's cringing face. When he stopped shouting, Redstreak stepped back several paces, then flung one hand back over his shoulder. He was holding a handle of a leather strap, like something you might use to prod livestock, only this was much longer. He whipped his arm forward and the strap cut through the air. As the end of it snapped, it made a tremendous crack that cut through the noise of the camp and opened a bloody slash on the villager's chest. Kira gasped, then covered her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes, and bile rose in her throat as she realized that the poor man already had several cuts across his bare torso, the fresh wounds glistening in the firelight. He screamed again and contorted his body against the tree trunk, as if to get away, but there was no escape. Kira's first instinct was to run back to Tico, but fear had rooted her in place. She didn't want to make any noise and risk being discovered by the man with the strap. After stepping close to the villager again, Redstreak turned and addressed his group. He roared out a stream of unfamiliar words. Kira tilted her head and wrinkled her brow. During her travels with Tara, she noticed that people from various villages had slightly different ways of talking, yet she was always able to understand them with no problem. This wasn't even close to the same thing. After Redstreak shouted, the general tumult of the camp quieted considerably. He was clearly the leader, as the big man gestured broadly at the prisoner he had been tormenting, and everyone else in the encampment shifted positions or drew closer to observe the little scene. The meaning of his words was clear enough. The man from Nafulu was ready to talk now. Redstreak planted his boots in a wide stance in front of the villager and crossed his unusually long arms over his chest. When he spoke again, it was in words that Kira could make out, although in a rough, unfamiliar accent. The phrases came together haltingly, like when Tico was just learning to talk. How many number people in village? Redstreak said, pointing to the general direction of Nafulu. He then made punching gestures in mime swinging some sort of weapon to emphasize his next words. People who make war? The man tied to the tree shook his head, eyes welling with tears. Please, Nafulu is a peaceful tribe. We have lived here for many years and had no problems with anyone. We only want crack. Redstreak snapped his cruel strap on the side of the tree, a clear reminder of what would happen again if his question wasn't answered. The villager, a captive, not a criminal, Kira realized, looked around the camp desperately but saw only sinister gray faces looking in his direction. Kira tightened her grip on the tree limb as the man swallowed heavily. All Nafulu men are trained to fight. Crack. Number, Redstreak growled. Give me number. The prisoner hung his head in misery and mumbled something inaudible. Redstreak reared back again with the long leather strap, and Kira winced, her whole body cringing in awful anticipation. But before he could deliver the punishing blow, another man emerged from the group. This new warrior, with a streak in his hair that brought Kira's mind the color of yellow thatching grass, stepped in between Redstreak and his captive. The first man, the leader, yelled something at this newcomer. Yellowgrass put up both palms in a placating gesture and spoke to Redstreak in more of the words that Kira could not begin to understand. Finally, Redstreak took a few grudging steps backward and made a sweeping gesture with his hands at the prisoner as if to say, "He's all yours." Yellowgrass approached the tree slowly and held a cup to the captive's lips for a few moments. The poor man gulped gracefully. Gratefully, Redstreak waved a hand dismissively and shook his head in disgust at the small gesture of kindness. When Yellowgrass spoke, it was in the language of the Nafulu. The words came slowly, but not nearly as forced as they had been with Redstreak. Pleased to answer the question, he said, with a quick but pointed glance at Redstreak, he continued, I fear more pain if this you do not do. Yellowgrass sighed. How many fighting men living in the village? He bent close to the prisoner to hear his whispered answer. Yellowgrass turned and addressed Redstreak in that strange language. The number must have been low because upon hearing the report, the great warrior chuckled, a rumble from deep in his chest that got louder and louder until he threw back his head in a full-throated laughter. His campmates raised their cups and joined him. Finally, Redstreak collected himself, spread his arms out, and patted the air with his palms to indicate the need for silence. When the crowd had simmered down, he turned his attention back to the interrogation. He spoke to Yellowgrass while looking and gesturing at the captive, clearly wanting another question to be asked. Yellowgrass spoke to the prisoner, using mimed gestures to augment the limited language between the two. The man from Nafulu merely shook his head, eyes wide in confusion and watery from terrified tears. Kira watched as Redstreak grabbed something belted around his waist. It was a long handle of some sort, wrapped in cloth and completely benign looking. But then Redstreak flicked his powerful wrist, and a long, sharp implement came shooting out with a hiss. Kira shivered, reminded of the dangerous retractable claws of the mighty lion in the stories that Tara had told her. This weapon was silver-toned, about 4 feet long, and ending in a sharp point, like a very long cutting tool. But it was impossibly lean, clearly not crafted from stone. Whatever material it was made of shone and shimmered in the firelight. Redstreak slashed it this way and that, carving a pattern as the brutal instrument whistled through the air. Then he stepped forward, pushed Yellowgrass out of the way, and held it right under the prisoner's nose. The Nafulu man shook his head, carefully as to not come in contact with the sharp edge of the weapon in front of his eyes. No, he said, I have never seen anything like that. More laughter erupted from the assembled crowd. Redstreak turned his head and barked another command at Yellowgrass. What do people of village use? The fair-haired man asked. To make war? The captive stared back with empty eyes. We protect our village with spears. Yellowgrass turned to Redstreak and mimed throwing a spear. The big warrior chuckled again and thrust his face close to the prisoner's. Sticks. He spat the word out like it was a profanity. Then he extended a crooked gray talon of a finger. You fight with sticks. He poked the man's chest with each word. Then, with two hands, Redstreak raised a silver instrument in the air, spun it around, and in one fluid motion brought it crashing down on a low-hanging tree branch. Kara gasped as it went through the wood with no resistance, leaving a neat little circle poking out of the trunk as the branch fell to the ground. She shuddered. You didn't need a storyteller's imagination to picture what would happen if those men brought such weapons into battle with the people of Nafulu. It would not be a battle at all. Kira's whole body tensed as she felt the branch she was sitting on start to bounce. Oh no, one of their scouts? The thought flashed through her mind that if she were discovered it would be bad for her, but much worse for Zidu. She whipped her head around, prepared to leap from the branch. But it was just Tico slowly making his way toward her. He must have followed her at a distance. Kira's relief lasted only a moment. She did not want her little brother to see any of this. She held up a hand and mouthed, "Stop." But it was too late. Tico's eyes went wide as he surveyed the scene below them, a look of pure terror stealing across his face. He pried his gaze away from the camp and shuffled along the branch, moving toward Kira. He took one hand off the limb and reached for his sister. The gesture broke her heart. He looked just like he had when he was frightened toddler seeking comfort. The branch dipped sharply as he moved to her end. On instinct, Kira's hand shot out and grabbed a limb above to stabilize herself. The branch they were on cracked and broke in half. Kira's stomach flopped, but she had the presence of mind to tighten her grip overhead and was left dangling in the air. Tico reached wildly for her, but was not nearly quick enough. He plunged down into the middle of the camp.